In 1957, George Langland published the short story entitled The Fly. It didn't take long for an adaptation to get off the ground, as writer-director Kurt Newman was very interested in the story and desperately wanted to make an adaptation of it. A year later, The Fly was released, starring David Hedison, Patricia Owens, and the always delightful to see Vincent Price. It remains extremely faithful to the short story with the exception of the setting and the ending. It spawned two sequels, Return of the Fly and Curse of the Fly. Then, in the early 1980s, producer Kip Oman was interested in remaking it and confronted Charles Edward Pogue with this idea. He was interested and he watched the original film, read the short story, and immediately wanted to make this film a reality. He then talked with another producer, Stuart Cornfeld, and he also agreed. They pitched the idea to 20th Century Fox, who were very interested in the project. They gave Pogue the money to write a first draft, and when he and Cornfeld started talking about various ideas for the film, they both agreed that a gradual metamorphosis would be much more interesting than an instantaneous monster of the original. Executives read the script and they hated it. So much so, they withdrew from the project and only after a lot of negotiation only agreed to distribute the film while Poe gets money from another source. The new producer, and I'm not lying, was in actuality Mel Brooks. Kornfeld gave the script to Brooks, who liked it but still wanted a different writer. Pogue was then withdrawn from the project and Waylon Green was hired to do rewrites. When the producers didn't like Green's material, Pogue was then brought back to polish the script. Brooks and Kornfeld at the time were looking for a director and both thought David Cronenberg would be perfect. But he was working on Total Recall at the time for Dino De Laurentiis and was unavailable. The next pick was Robert Bierman. He was flown to LA to meet Pogue when tragedy struck. His family was vacationing in South Africa and his daughter was killed in an accident and he needed to be with his family. It was then because of this that he was also unable to do the film. However, luck would have it that Cronenberg left production of Total Recall and when Kornfeld heard of this, jumped at the chance to get him on the project again. Cronenberg agreed to do the film, but only if he could rewrite the script. They agreed. Cronenberg did do extensive rewrites of the film, but kept most of the general plot, with expanded themes and sequences that were only touched upon in Pogue's script. It was because of this that he demanded that both he and Pogue share screenplay credit because he wouldn't have made the script the way it was without Pogue's initial draft. Eventually, with much deliberation and many cutscenes later, the film was released in 1986. Now, I'm just going to say this about the original really quick. The original deserves a watch at least once. It's not as campy as many other B movies from the 50s, and it's definitely in a higher class of film. However, I will admit, I have seen the original film, and it's just fine. It's not campy, but it isn't very interesting. While the highlights are the scenes with Hélène and Andre after he transforms, most of the film is the son Philippe and Hélène trying to catch the fly, which isn't incredibly interesting to me. However, despite this, since the original is so overshadowed by the remake, I recommend watching the original film at least once. With this, I am with the majority, and I do think that the remake is a lot better. I feel like Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, and Veronica Quaife, played by Gina Davis, are much more interesting protagonists, and the devolvement that Brundle goes throughout the film is nothing short of heartbreaking. While everyone mentions the amazing effects of the film, and they are amazing, it's another one of those cases where the story, writing, and characters are much better than the effects. The effects are just another cog in the machine and not the showcase like it is with a lot of other 80s hits like The Prowler or something like that. The gradual metamorphosis is also much more interesting as it showcases more story opportunity and more character development. With the small change, it just makes the story so much better. That's really why the remake is so much better than the original. It's because the original doesn't have much story opportunity outside of trying to get the white-headed fly. Here you see Brundle evolve into Brundlefly, and it serves as a much more interesting story. It's also not just physically, but mentally as well. Brundle constantly goes through personality changes with the physical change of his body as well. Plus, I also like how the themes of a tragic love story is accentuated. In the original film, it's more of the inevitability of a disastrous marriage as we see the result of the movie before the actual story starts. Here, it's more of the unpredictability of what will and could happen with Seth and Veronica. as Seth's views keep changing with his condition and how far he'll go with the way he's devolving. As I've grown up, the more and more I've appreciated it, I also see it less like a horror film and more like a tragic love story. It's still a very horror esque film. The love story between Seth and Veronica is the anchor to what makes this story so engaging outside of the gradual metamorphosis. Their chemistry is very believable as Goldblum and Davis were dating at the time, and it works incredibly in the film's favor. I could talk endlessly about this film, but everything great about this film has been said already, so I would just be reiterating what hundreds of people have already said. I adore this film, and it's one of my favorites, so I do recommend it. However, I do also recommend the original purely because of my respect for it as a higher class B movie, similar to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, even though Invasion of the Body Snatchers was much better. So I recommend watching both flies back to back and make your own conclusions.